The most common question I always get from people who aspire to become a very good player one day is the question of how do I come up with the best move in any given position at any given time? Well, I personally have a 5-step process that I use to help me come up with the best move, and all of that is coming straight up. The hardest part of every single chess game is of course finding the best move in any given position. I mean, if it was the easiest part, then I guess, everybody would be the best player in the world, right? Everybody would be Magnus Carlsen, and that wouldn't make chess very fun. But finding the best move in a position can become an enigma for any beginner or intermediate player who doesn't really know where to start. I mean, when calculating, should we all act like a computer and just, think of every single move that is possible and then just try to calculate which one is best from there? Obviously not. Not even the best player, Magnus Carlsen, would be able to analyze so many different positions and so quickly, even if the game was maybe 2 hours 30 minutes with a 30-second increment on every move. It would just be impossible and impractical because you'd be using way too much time thinking of useless moves like pawn a4, pawn a3, like in the position I just showed you guys. So how do we come up the best move practically and without using much time while still finding the very best move in a given position? In my 5-step process in finding the best move in a position, my first step is finding 5 to 7 candidate moves in any given position. Now, what is a candidate move to begin with? A candidate move in chess is basically a move that helps you carry out your plan or overall game plan in any given position. In this position, it is white to move, and there are many different candidate moves he can be thinking of in order to come up with a solid move. For example, in this position, you can already see that most of white's pieces are heading towards the king side over here. So therefore, we know our plan as the white pieces is to generally attack the black king in black's position. So what are 5 to 7 candidate moves we can be thinking of? For example, in this position, queen f3 is a solid move, as that move allows us to move the queen next to h3, which would attack our opponent's king. Another possible move is perhaps rook f3, and maybe bring in the rook this way to attack the opponent's king that way. Maybe we could bring in the knight and bring in a knight this way. However, what we need to know is that a couple moves should never be going across into our minds, and we should not be wasting our time on certain moves. For example, in this position, pawn a4, even though it's a move you might see in a beginner game very often, it is a move you won't see a high-level player play because it has nothing to do with our plan in this position. And therefore, a4 shouldn't even come up in your mind, and you will save a lot of time if you don't think of useless moves like these ones. So let's say we have this position in front of us, and we already have our 5 candidate moves that we want to choose between. For example, let's say we have knight g3, pawn e4, queen c2, bishop d2, and rook g1 to choose between. Let's say these are the 5 moves that randomly came to our mind as we were thinking about moves we should play. In fact, if you guys have any other candidate moves, I want you guys to pause your clock and actually think of any more, or just state to yourself what are some moves that are coming into your mind right now, as practicing is the best way of actually going through this process in order to become a better player. But onto this, so we have 5 moves, but we don't know if any of these are the best moves to choose between. So would we narrow this down, and how would we find the best move in this position to us? So already I can eliminate 2 moves over here. And this is the second step in our 5-step process of finding the best move. The second step being eliminating moves that don't follow a coherent plan or not a very good plan whatsoever. So we can eliminate queen c2 and bishop d2 because the only reason why we're playing these moves is to develop a piece. This is a very important piece of advice to all of you guys out there who want to become an intermediate / advanced player out there. I know the ABCs of chess is something that you guys have learned, or maybe just recently learned, and it's something that you guys probably follow very religiously. For example, attacking the center, bringing out the pieces, castling the king, are things that every master tells you to do if you're someone new. However, when you're improving, you need to learn that these things were just rules that you guys learned when you were a beginner in order to help you basically make moves when you guys didn't know what was good or not. But as you're getting better, if you're just developing pieces, controlling the center, or castling the king for no good reason other than just to follow these 3 rules that somebody has told you in the past, that's never good. Bishop d2, what does it do? It develops a piece, but what else? If there's no what else, then it's not a good move. Queen c2 has the same idea. So what does knight g3, e4, and rook g1 do? Each one has a different idea. Rook g1 has an idea that perhaps we can bring our bishop back in the future so we can attack our opponent's open king over here. That's a possible idea. The second thing that we can think about is possibly, moving knight g3 to maybe take control of this f5 square so our opponent can't really go for a counterattack like pawn f5 or maybe pawn h5. e4 does the exact same thing as knight g3, in which it stops this f5 idea. We are now on our third step of a five-step process in finding the best moves. Now, as you can already tell, even though we are only on our third step, we have already eliminated so many moves and narrowed it down to three possibilities: pawn e4, knight g3, and rook g1. But on our third step, we want to narrow this down even more, possibly to two moves or maybe even to one. So what is the third step to begin with? The third step is simply calculate. But even though I said it simply, this step is probably the hardest one, and the one that I make mistakes of, Magnus Carlsen makes mistakes on, and what you will most likely make mistakes, in fact, definitely make mistakes on as well. So what do I mean by calculate? Now, calculating at your level, at the beginner slash intermediate level, is going to be much different than how I calculate or how a super grandmaster calculates, or even how a computer calculates. So the way I recommend beginner or intermediate players to calculate, it's quite simple. Don't try to calculate 5 to 20 moves in advance, trying to calculate all the different random possibilities of your opponent and your moves, as that would take too much time and it would be very, very inaccurate, as you guys are just beginners or intermediate players and you guys don't quite get the gist of calculating so deeply. In fact, even at my level is very far away from people like Magnus Carlsen, so far away that my calculation skills are very weak, very bad, but I can get by even using just general ideas and very little calculating. So how do I do that? It's actually quite simple. In any position, for example in this one over here, if I have to calculate a move like rook g1, I wouldn't really think about moves like rook c8, rook d8, or rook e8, because even though these moves are possible moves my opponent can make, none of these moves actually make any immediate threats or make the possibility to actually create an immediate threat in the future. There's nothing to be worried about. Instead, I would start having to calculate moves that actually could be a threat to me. For example, a move like pawn f5, maybe a move like pawn h5, maybe pawn d5. And after seeing all these, I have to realize if I play pawn f5 and if I capture, bishop captures, and maybe, move pawn e4, then my opponent can move his bishop back to g6, and all of a sudden my f pawn is weak, my rook on g1 hasn't done anything yet. In fact, it doesn't look like it will be doing anything in the future. And it looks like my position, even though it might not be that bad, I realized this rook g1 hasn't really amounted to anything for me. I can even go through a couple variations and be like, my opponent doesn't even have to play f5. He could play pawn d5 and break open the center, and then maybe my rook on g1 is actually looking kind of silly. So maybe I don't like rook g1 because I already see that there's some possibilities my opponents can make to make it kind of scary for me. So then I would have to calculate some other ideas. Maybe I like this knight g3 idea because knight g3 kind of stops f5 and it definitely stops h5, but does it really stop pawn d5? So then I would have to calculate again after pawn d5, maybe if I capture, bishop captures, maybe bishop captures here, queen captures, do I like this position? And the answer is, this position is not actually that bad because I have this very nice square my knight can go to attack this bishop, maybe play pawn e4 in the future, maybe pressure h6 as well. But in this position, I see that I have a weak d3 pawn. Now, is it worth? Maybe, maybe not. We will have to calculate a little bit more, but we don't need to if we can just calculate the final move here, in which pawn e4 here. When I see pawn e4, I suddenly think, wait a second, this pawn e4 move is actually looking quite good. And why do I say that? The reason why I say that is quite simple. Do you remember our opponent's threats of f5 and d5? This e4 move effectively shuts both of them down. If he plays, I capture. And if he plays f5, I capture here as well. Both moves that my opponent can do to make counterplay are effectively countered. Not only that, our bishop can breathe free. We can maybe double up here to attack h6. Maybe we can still play knight g3. And so here I say, oh wait, my position is quite good here no matter what really happens. So instead of playing knight g3, which possibly could be good, who knows if that d3 pawn could become a weakness, I will play e4 because this not only follows our plan, but effectively stops our opponent's plan and allows us to think less for the future. Because now we know that knight g3, knight f5 is an idea. We know bishop to e3, maybe queen d2 to attack this weak weak h6 idea. In fact, we could even play rook g1 still, maybe pawn f4. And we have so many different ideas now. And we know this because we calculated, which leads to our fourth step, and probably and also a very difficult step if our calculations didn't really deliver anything clear to us. But in this position, step number 4 is as easy as decision make, and basically make a decision after seeing our 3 candidate moves here, which was again e4, knight g3, rook g1. Which one seemed the best? As I explained in our calculation section, pawn e4 is probably the best for us. And if we were to check the engine, e4 is one of the top suggestions for this simple reason. And even though it might not be the top suggestion, it's probably the best suggestion for us because it stops all our opponent's plans, and that is effectively the best thing for us because it's very difficult for us to blunder or make a mistake in the future. So step number 4 is decision make. I choose e4, and the easiest step of them all is finally make the move that we chose through our decisions. Don't be scared if you don't get this 5-step process immediately. It takes time and experience to get very good at it. But I assure you, by using this 5-step process instead of what you usually do in which you just pray or maybe just don't know what to do whatsoever, you will increase your skill so very much. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like and make sure to subscribe and tell me how useful this video actually has been in your own chess growth. If you guys want to watch another chess video related to this one, make sure to check that video over there. See you guys in the next video.